with me David Tilney. David, if you want to wave there, everybody will be able to see it. David is an expert in property management. He speaks around the country in the U.S. and also around the world because of his expertise in the realm of property management that is a little bit outside of the box. It's not your typical property management type seminar that you would go to if you went and saw him speak. I've attended and seen him present, and every time I go, I learn something new about how to make more profit as a property manager and to automate that process so that you're spending less time pulling your hair out. And David, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but this David Tilney.
No, I think that's good, Brian. Thanks very much for having me on.
Sure. What we're doing is, and I talked to David about this probably, I don't know, two, 3 weeks ago, where I'm trying to get more people on the show, if you will, on Hangouts that can bring value to other people that are in various niches. And David, today what we're going to be talking about is, and I'll share my screen here so that other people can see what we're going to discuss. So hopefully you can see that. And as you guys can see, we are going to discuss some questions that landlords often ponder. These are very poignant questions, and they're questions that a lot of landlords want to know the answers to, especially from somebody like David that's got, I don't know, how many years of experience now do you have in property management and landlording?
I started in '78, I think. And really these questions came about because I think a lot of people know what they do. Most people know how they do it, but I don't think enough people ask themselves why they do what they do.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, and like I said, he's going to be very thought-provoking, and so this is going to be really valuable for anybody that is primarily as a property manager. Do you see these? Who else do you think would benefit from this from our interaction today?
Well, forget property managers, and that I mean fee managers. I think any owner-operator that manages property of their own, they need to know this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. Things like why rent is due on the 1st and usually late on the 5th. I mean, these are all very, very important things to know, and I think that the problem is that a lot of people, especially when they own property themselves, I know because I've done this in my past. I've owned property myself and had a lot of challenges in managing it, just in terms of getting the rent on time and just there's so many different things there's so many different hassles and problems that you can run into, and literally that property can take up all your time. I mean, that's really the biggest challenge. That's the biggest hassle that I found, is that it was like, you know, I bought the property as an investment, and then ended up taking all my time. It took up all my time, both my personal time and my working time, and that was not something that I initially bargained for. So I guess you're going to probably help us to manage that challenge in what we talk about today. So let me just go to the questions so that I can hold on one second. Okay, so David, why is the rent due on the 1st and usually late on the 5th? Let's just go into that question first.
If you don't state in a contract when rent's due, it's like interest, it would be due in arrears. So attorneys, to protect landlords who aren't careful, say it's due on the 1st. No magic to the number. We're doing this interview today on the 31st of October. My rents are actually due on the last business day of the month prior to the 1st. I will have all of my November rents in my bank account by this evening. So there's no magic, and certainly why are they late on the 5th? Ours are late if not received on the last business day of the month. We serve a 3-day notice by noon on the following day. There's no reason to keep people's heads buried in the sand. You want to take action. You want to be firm but fair. it just doesn't help anyone at all to ignore the problem.
So what you're saying is that there's really no exceptions to that rule. It's a hard and fast rule, and you end up getting having more hassles down the road if you don't stick to it and stick to your business plan or your business procedures. Really, I think it would be good to have a written guide of procedures for your business and then just follow them.
Yeah, absolutely. If I was setting up my business today, I'd make the rents due on the 25th of the month prior to the 1st. Again, no magic on the 1st. You want it done, finished, put to bed. Tomorrow morning, I can go online, download all my bank statements, reconcile my bank statements showing my November rents on hand, and I'm done for the month of November. That's a nice way to run your business.
Okay. Okay, great. So why do landlords usually sign a one-year lease that becomes a month-to-month agreement at the end of that lease?
Again, I would say that, well, two things. First of all, landlords don't want people to leave at inopportune time for them. This time of year is not a good time to fill a lease. Next month is probably worse. January is also bad. So many landlords will sign a lease that brings them to a better time of year to have to fill a vacancy. The problem is that a lease never locked a tenant into a long-term situation, and what it can do is lock a landlord into a long-term unpleasant situation. So the key, at least for us, is we advertise long-term occupancy, and our longest occupancy was 24 years and 10 months. Our next longest was 18 years. Our average is, I believe, 5.7 years. And yet all of our contracts are actually written on a month-to-month basis. If I was designing a system where I wanted to use a lease, I would do a month-to-month contract for the initial period because you've got someone that's not tried and tested. Once they're tried and tested, then I might sign a lease after the initial period was over, once I knew that their sense of responsibility, their moral code, and all those other things which count when you're dealing with tenants were correct, then you would offer them a lease. Because a lease really can lock a landlord into what can be a very unpleasant situation.
That's very interesting. That's very contrary to what the standard is out there, and that's the one thing I've always found interesting about you and your course, and you know, it makes sense because you've done this. I mean, you've learned from trial and error over the last almost 30 years in doing this, and you've had enough tenants to know what works and what doesn't work. And what I'm hearing you say is that basically the leases are really going to almost favor the landlords than it more, or the people that are the renters, as opposed to the landlords. So therefore, don't enter into one until you know who you're dealing with after a certain amount of time. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, it really is. The other thing that I'd point out is that if you look at most initial leases, at the end of the lease, they become a month-to-month. And you've got to say, why does that happen? And the reason that happens is if you have a lease that goes from a point in time to another point in time and terminates, and at the end of the lease, you continue to accept rent, then the courts will deem that that lease renewed for a like time period at the same rent. And so again, to protect landlords who are lazy, lawyers change the initial lease to become a month-to-month so that they're not locked into that kind of a situation. The bottom line is, in my opinion, landlords should always sign a new contract at the end of every period. It may not be an initial year because, for example, our contracts all end one of 2 days a year. They either end the last day of June or the last day of July of each year. And the reason for us is our properties, number one, are in Colorado. And in Colorado, we find folks don't want to move when snow's on the ground and or when kids are in school. And what that really means is that our largest group of folks looking for homes are in the summer, and that's when we can get the highest rents.
Wow, so you really thought of a lot of different things. It's really smart to have everything being done at one time. That way you can focus on getting that task done all at once and not get distracted, and then you're done with it for the entire, in essence, for the entire year until the next 6 months or whatever. So you do the same thing probably with your, you said, yeah, with your payments. All your payments are due on the same date. You don't have, stragglers that, that pay you on the 15th or whatever. I mean, everything's due on this, and so it really helps you to systematize your business so that there's a regularity to it, and so that you can prepare to deal with the task that you're going to have to do. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're talking to me in Naples, Florida. The properties we're involved with are in Colorado Springs. We use ACH, Automatic Clearinghouse, to collect all the rents. We, in fact, take the money out of our tenants' bank accounts once a month. So it takes me 5 minutes to collect all of our rents. And when you get to why all of our contracts are due one time a year, if you think about it, that means we have to analyze the market and set our rents at one time. So it's very, very efficient to figure out how we're going to price our properties and market them, et cetera, et cetera.
That's smart, because so in essence you're doing all that at once, as opposed to going in and saying, okay, what are the current market rents, what's going on now, and you do it all at one time. It makes for just a much more efficiently run business. And that ACH concept is genius. I mean, when you can go in and in essence take the money out of their account, as opposed to getting a check, taking the check, bringing it down to the bank, going down to the bank, maybe getting the check maybe bounced. This way you're going into their account and you're seeing if there's money in there. If there's not, immediately. There's no time in transit. There's no the checks in the mail. There's none of that stuff, and that's really, really genius. I mean,
yeah, I do need to make a correction in that it is possible for an ACH to bounce, and it may take a day or two until you discover that. But so much faster than a check, and so if you ever had to get into court, you could a heck of a lot faster. Now, the last time I did an eviction was back in 1981, and so we've certainly streamlined and gotten better at our craft, and we really have, I'd have to look up the procedure to figure out how to do that. One of the things we do to help it work out with the ACH is 3 or 4 days or a week in advance before the ACH comes out of our tenants' bank accounts, I send out an email with a BCC, a blank carbon copy, to all of our tenants, essentially saying, heads up, rents are coming out of your bank accounts on this day. And then if they have a problem, they could contact me ahead of time, or they get a hold of Great Aunt Tilly and borrow the money, whatever it takes to make it work. But really, I would say that we go generally for probably a period of 18 months without ever having a bounced ACH.
Wow. Do you attribute that to, what do you attribute that to primarily, in terms of the lack of, I mean, there's so many things that you just said that just jumped out at me. The fact that the last eviction you did was back in '81. I know, the last time I was a landlord, which was 10 years ago, I mean, I had an eviction almost immediately. So, what do you attribute that to primarily?
Tenant screening is always the key. Always the key. You need to screen for folks that, number one, don't have a victim mentality, don't have an entitlement mentality, and well, let me back up and say what we think we do more than anything else in the business is we hire someone to do a job, and the person we're hiring is the tenant, and the primary job description is to maintain and improve the house and grounds. That's number one. We want places maintained and improved. Number two, we expect you to pay the rent on time. If you don't want to do that, don't rent from us. We're too tough. Number three, we want you to get along with the neighbors. Number four, I look our applicants in the eyes and I say, we want you to stay at least until you die, and hopefully until your kids die. And we chuckle about it because, and I point out that they might not want to stay quite that long, but really we are in the long-term business. And lastly, we tell them that we want them to use us as a reference as needed, but we essentially want them to leave us alone as best as possible. And likewise, we agree to treat them with respect and leave them alone. Now, in hiring an employee for a job, you got to look at the job skills. And on our application, among other things, we do ask job skills. We ask, for example, what they can do: plumbing, roofing, appliance repair, type other, what tools they own. We think that to live in a house demands having some basic skills and some tools, or else knowing you're going to pay the nice man who does have those things. The primary benefit of a single-family house over every other piece of real estate that I know of is it's the only piece of real estate that can come complete with an on-site resident manager. The resident manager is called tenant. The key is to, number one, screen for the right guy, then share expectations to get your job done the way you want it done.
I wouldn't believe it unless I knew that you've done it for so long. I wouldn't believe that you would actually be able to do that, and because I know that, and now that you're saying this again, your presentation is now coming back to me fresh in terms of what you cover, and now I remember that always jumped out at me, that it's almost like my jaw dropped. I remember when I was sitting in your and hearing you for the first time, when I said, really, like, how does he actually get that done? I mean, it's nice to hear that maybe he can do it, but how do you find people like that? How do you find people that are willing to take that job?
Well, any businessman, if they have a business, they have to hire employees. I really like, there's a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I don't know if you've read it, but he makes the point in there that some company, he analyzes the difference between good companies and great companies. Great companies being defined as those that had a big increase in their profits and were able to hold that increase for well over 5 years.
Right.
And he said good companies hire people to do a job. Great companies put the best people they can find on the bus, knowing that those folks will know where to drive the bus being the company. So we do the same thing with tenants. We're like the Marines. We're looking for a few good men, and it's not first come, first serve. We are looking for the best of the best. And I think one of the things that has happened in recent years is people are absolutely paranoid about looking for the best of the best applicants. They think that if they don't set a minimum threshold standard and take the first person across that standard, they're going to be hit with a fair housing complaint. And I'm here to tell you that that's not what the law says, and I can back that up with some quotes, and maybe I should do that really quickly. Maybe it would be appropriate.
Yeah.
I was in, where was I? I was on the island of Kauai in Hawaii at the National Association of Residential Property Managers meeting, annual convention on September 26th of 2008. And Jelani Madarica, who is the lead civil rights analyst for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development in Honolulu's field office, was asked a question by Jan Leisure at that meeting. Jan stood up and said something to the effect of, is it legal to accept applicants on a best qualified basis as long as we disclose and do not disqualify anyone based on any protected class, either on a federal, state, or local level? Well, I can tell you, when she asked the question, you could have heard a pin drop in the entire room. You had probably 300 property managers sitting there, and it was the one question that you're not allowed to ask, especially to a fair housing guy.
Right.
And there was a pregnant pause as he thought and reflected, and finally he said, yeah, that's okay, as long as you disclose that it's not first come, first serve. Now, to back that up for folks who might be listening to this who are from California, Janet Portman, and Janet runs, I'm trying to think, she runs the press in Berkeley, California, that does landlord-tenant law and all kinds of things. She was asked this question. The question was, I'm a new rental property owner and I've just selected my first tenant for the home I own. The first applicant was acceptable, but I chose the second because he was able to move earlier. But the first person was, after all, the first. Am I risking legal action? And she goes on, and I won't read you the whole thing, but bottom line is, she said, landlords often face situations where two or more applicants appear to be roughly equally qualified. At that point, they may need a tiebreaker. And she says that, yes, you can use the date of the application as a tiebreaker, but oftentimes you'll find that there are other factors, such as higher income, rave reviews from prior landlords, or a long history of steady renting. And so you don't have to take the first person that crosses the threshold that meets a minimum standard, but you do need to be consistent in the way you view folks. Now, just to give Janet Portman a little credibility as to who she is, she has appeared on all kinds of national TV. She's been quoted in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Kiplinger, Smart Monies, LA Times, and other publications. She was a public defender for the California State Public Defender's Office, has graduate degrees from Stanford and a law degree from Santa Clara University. And Robert Russ, who's no longer with us, but he was a nationally syndicated columnist on real estate, on her book that was called, is called, Every Landlord's Guide to Finding Tenants. Quote, he writes, "At last, the long-needed, ultra-complete guidebook every residential landlord should have to find and select quality tenants." He says, on a scale of 1 to 10, this outstanding book rates off the chart 12. So, I mean, here's a gal who's an attorney, went to Stanford. She says you don't have to take first come, first serve. What upsets me is discrimination is a dirty word. It shouldn't be a dirty word. You used to be able to say I have discriminating taste. Illegal discrimination is very bad. You don't want to illegally discriminate, but if you don't discriminate as a landlord, you will not survive this business.
So that's very good insight. And by the way, she hasn't been on a hangout with me, so we got to get her on a hangout. I mean, she's got a very long list of all the things she's done, but she's not going to be in the who's who until she's been on a hangout with me.
She hasn't been on your hangout. Well, that's a very good point. You know, Nolo Press is the outfit I was thinking of. She runs Nolo Press out of, I always call it the United Republic of Berkeley. But that's where she is. That's a fairly liberal area.
I know.
It to be very, very pro-tenant. Has things like rent control, and yet here she's saying no problem. You can do it on a best qualified basis.
Yeah, I used to visit Berkeley quite frequently because I worked for a company that was based out of Berkeley, so I know I'm familiar with the whole Berkeley. Yeah, I understand. One thing I did want to point out is that really what it sounds like is, David, is that people that are renting properties need to have policies and procedures, and because that's really, I think, what's critical in terms of setting up these policies and procedures to create uniformity, so that you're not just. I think what I'm hearing is that this lady and the other gentleman that you quoted are saying it's okay as long as you treat everybody the same way, and I think that would be a great way to do that is to put that in the policies and procedures for your business so that you can reference them. Is that good?
Well, yeah, absolutely. You must have a policy procedure manual, even if you only have one rental. If you don't, if someone comes after you, you can't justify why you do what you do, and it will come back to haunt you. You've got to be consistent. That's a very crucial word. Okay. And you know, all these questions that you had. That's the point. Most people don't ask why they do what they do. They do it because everyone else does it. They do it because the form shows it that way. And one of the things which I really work hard to stress in my classes is you got to draft by design, not by default. You can't do things just because everyone else does it that way. If you do, I mean, well, I don't know how many landlords you know in the business, but I would tell you that I know many people in the business that after about 20 or at most 25 years, they burn out. They can't survive long term. And that's not my objective. I very much like what I'm doing. I think we provide a tremendous benefit in the marketplace. I mean, long-term housing. People can move in. They can put down roots, put in the vegetable garden. Instead of saying, here's a contract, sign here, press hard, last copy is yours, read it later if you want. We really go through things. We make sure there's a meeting in the mind. And most landlords, I think, say, move into the house, sit in a chair, don't touch anything. If you do anything wrong, here's how we're going to beat you up. Our approach says here's the house, now go make it a home. If you're improving it, we're on the team. If you're not, well, we don't want you to do something that's going to hurt yourself, hurt someone else, or hurt the property. So if you got any big ideas, clear them with us up front in advance so it doesn't come back to haunt you or haunt us. But we want people to internalize and take our houses and make them their homes. Right.
Well, I hear you. As you know, you and I both saw each other at the NARPM meeting, the National Association of Property Managers meeting in D.C., and I was, to be quite honest, I was kind of surprised to see you there because I know that a lot of these concepts and ideas that you're talking about are not the standard in the property management field, which everybody at the NARPM meeting was I think they buy into a lot of these concepts that you're talking about in terms of you know, these are the rules. Don't touch anything. This is, we're going to beat you up if we. I mean, so do you think that your principles could apply to the property manager? That's the average NARPM member.
That's why I'm a member. I think it's important. I'm definitely a square peg in a round hole, and I don't hold myself out as being, smarter or having better business than other property managers. Some folks make a heck of a lot more money than I do. They do very, very well, but their business plan is to maximize their property management income. My business plan stems from being an investor, which means maximize the investment income from the properties, both for myself and for the owners. And one of the things we do that's also very different from the folks at NARPM is you can't hire me as an agent to manage your property.
Right.
But I can lease your property from you and turn around and sublease and take a spread. And I'll only act as a principal, which really takes vicarious liability, meaning you being vicariously liable for the acts that I perform while I'm under an employment agreement, out of the question. It just doesn't exist, and there's so many other benefits also at the same time.
But so then can your concepts coexist with a property manager? I mean, do you think that or are they mutually exclusive?
No, I think they definitely can exist. I've had a number of the past presidents of the National Association take my seminars. I can name people that do use our concepts that are there now. No, they definitely exist. There's a difference. The scale is a difference. I mean, I decided less was more. When I started in this business, I wanted to have ownership, let's say, of 10% of 200 houses. And after a period of time, I realized that's not financial freedom, that's financial servitude. My idea was that if I just breathed oxygen for 30 years, I'd own a bunch of houses. But now I'd rather have less and have less employees, because I did gear up at one stage of my life, and I did have employees and overhead, and now my wife and I can run our own stuff, and the master lease properties that we have no employees. We can live where we want, and it's a very nice lifestyle.
So what you're saying is that you are in essence finding properties that you can quote unquote master lease, and in order to manage the property for the person that might be having challenges with that property, and you're the principal, and you're just making the difference between how does that. You're making the difference between what you lease the property for from the person that is currently managing the property and what they lease it to you for, correct?
I have total flexibility. I mean, I can negotiate a different deal with anyone I talk to. I leased a property in 1984 for 35 years at a fixed rent, and I secured my lease with a deed of trust. 10 years later, I was given half the appreciation to remove my lease from the property. Leases are very valuable. People don't understand the value of leases, and they're very low profile. Ownership is a much higher profile. If you want to put a bullseye on your back, have all your properties in your name.
Yeah.
I'm just a tenant. If the courts are pro-tenant, that's what I am. So there's a lot of benefits, and the income I generate is passive income by IRS definition, which means it's not subject to self-employment tax. $100,000, for example, of earned income from being a fee manager, you'll pay about $32,000 of income tax. The exact same amount of income on a master lease, I pay about $18,000 and change. It's
Wow.
a very different way of doing business. I can do performance leases where I pay a percentage of what I receive if and when I receive it. I can do fixed leases where I can give you 12 post-dated checks. You can go around the world and put a check in the bank once a month. I can negotiate any deal that makes sense to me, be it 3 years, 35 years, or anything in between. So I can tailor to the needs of the owner better than someone that has a company policy that we charge X percent or X number of dollars per month, and this is the way we run our business. From my approach, I listen to the owner, I hear what the owner's needs are, solve their problem, their needs, and whatever's left is for me. I can take the rest. And
Right.
I think I've got a lot more latitude and flexibility in negotiating deals.
Yeah, I think you do. And what I'm hearing is that you, because of the fact that you have a master lease, you actually have a different relationship to that property as a principal, as opposed to as a property manager would. And so you've got a lot more. And you've also, what I'm hearing you say is that you create the lease, which is a very powerful document, like you said, that people aren't aware of how powerful they can be. You create a lease and an arrangement with the owner and/or the property manager, I guess, to make it work for everybody. And I think that's kind of where the real leverage comes from, is that you're able to think outside of the box, and really you're acting almost like a doctor, where you're asking the questions, where are your pain points, and then you solve those problems with whatever needs to be created in order to solve those problems, to give the owner or the property manager what they need, so that ultimately it's a win-win. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's true. I mean, the way I view myself is I'm in the real estate business, whatever that means. And I have a toolbox with different tools in it. And I go and talk to an owner, and it's, what's the situation? And then, as Peter Fortunato would say, what's the problem?
Right.
And then what's the solution? And the key thing that Peter Fortunato taught me, and for those of your listeners that don't know that name, they need to Google it, because they really need to know that name.
Yeah.
Then what's the next solution? Then what's the next solution? So when I go to talk to someone, I can buy it, I can option it, I can lease it, I can, how can we make things better for you given the situation you've got today? And it just gives me a lot more possibilities than saying, yeah, and these are totally arbitrary fake numbers, but yeah, we'll manage your house and we'll charge you 18% as a leasing fee and various other markups. Different deal, totally different deal, and it's fun. It really is a fun way to do business.
Yeah, it's fun. I think it's fun because it's creative. You're not just dealing with this way is the way it's done every single time. You're really trying to meet somebody where they're at and provide a solution to a problem that they have, and it's no different with me in terms of creating content. Like today, we started with what are the problems? Those are the questions. Those are the problems that people are having, and you're going to give the answers to those questions in order to provide solutions. And it's no different in what I do than it is with what you do. So I think it's really it just allows you, I think, to potentially get more. Have more opportunities, because you're not just thinking in terms of, well, it's got to fit this mold or else I can't. It doesn't work. So I think that's one of the biggest advantages that you have that maybe a lot of other people have. And do you find that you get a lot of properties from property managers, or just owners?
Oh, I don't really deal with property managers per se as a way to pick up properties. No, I negotiate with the owners. And I would tell you, in this business, the toughest part of the business, in my opinion, because I did start out as a fee manager in 1981. I canceled every agency relationship October 1st of 1996, turned around and leased the properties I used to manage, and didn't lose one account. But the toughest part of the business for me in the management business were really the owners. And because the owners thought they owned the thing, and they wanted to tell you what to do with it. And yet, from my standpoint, all I had was my time and my expertise, and they were involved with me because they thought that I knew what I was doing and I could maximize their bottom line income and make them theoretically a whole bunch more than they could make themselves after paying my fee. So I have so much more control as a master tenant than I ever did as a manager. And as a master tenant, I can sub out properties to another property manager, either with a management agreement, which I would not do, or with a master lease to another management company. So we can sometimes have tiered leases on a property, and we do that now.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's just there's so many questions as you're talking that are coming up. But I mean, if I'm just I mean, these are new types of leases. This master lease. This is something that is not standard out there, is it? Or is this something that somebody would be able to get from their attorney, or how do they get that?
I don't think any attorneys have it. I mean, I copied it really from the commercial markets. When I was in Hong Kong was on a leasehold interest from the PRC, People's Republic of China, to Great Britain for 100 years. When I was in Hawaii, I went around to title companies and picked up some Bishop Trust lease. Bishop Trust owns a whole bunch of the ground under Hawaii, and they lease the ground to developers who build condos and other projects, and then those are leased to buyers of the condos for 60 years. And so I grabbed those contracts. Think of hotels. In a hotel, you've got someone owns the ground typically. They lease the ground to the hotel who builds it. Then someone leases it to Holiday Inn for a 10-year leasehold period, and they sublease some to a catering department. There are all kinds of sandwich leases in the commercial business. I don't know of anyone else who does it in the residential business. You need to come to my seminar. I mean, this is an opportunity for you. No.
Well, this is a good point. So to maybe put this in, if somebody does want to find out more information about how they can implement these strategies, where would they go? David, you have a website, or?
Yeah, if they go to a website with my name, just davidtilney.com, and Tilney is spelled T as in Thomas, I-L-N as in Nancy, E-Y.com. I only do it typically once a year, and it just so happens we're the last day of October now, and we're going to be in Atlanta the 10th, 11th, and 12th of 2012. So, for most folks, they're going to be looking at next year, and I tend to flip-flop different parts of the country. Last year we were in Las Vegas. This year we're in Atlanta. Next year I suspect we'll be in Southern California, about the same time of year.
Okay, let me just put that up there. So that's David, and it's David Tilney. Let me just put in the
just davidtilney.com.
Okay, put that up for everybody.
I think we've gotten off the questions that we had, which is fine with me. I love management, and I'll talk anything about management that you want to cover.
Yeah, we'll go back to the questions here. There's davidtilney.com. That's your website address. Just confirm that's how they'd get a hold of you. So that's the main place that you'd want to go to in order to find out more about this. Let me go back to the questions, and then we'll wrap it up here in about probably 7 to 10 minutes here. I've got why don't landlords like pets, David?
Damage, potential lawsuits. Those are the two: dog bites and damage. In a perfect world, you might not want pets, but in reality, you like people who live with pets. Why? They tend to put down roots. They tend to stay a while. Tend to be more family-oriented. Pets for us are, in fact, income generators. We charge monthly pet rent. It's not a pet deposit. It's monthly pet rent. And over the years, I've done very well with that. I read a statistics recently as to what percentage of tenants will not rent a place if you don't allow pets, and it's something like 34%. It's a very high number. And if you think about it, pets somewhat trap the tenants in the house because other landlords are afraid of them, and so they'll renew and stay, and once they've stayed a few years, there's no reason for them to leave if they have a good relationship with you. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, I think that's one thing that blew me away when I first. It's so contrary to what I've heard as a landlord in terms of what you want to do with people that have pets. I mean, it's like stay away from them. They can be a hassle. But what you're saying is we try to rent to them because probably for that reason, because other people think that way. And as long as you manage them appropriately, you manage that particular type of client appropriately, just like you have suggested with the other clients, with your policies and procedures. Just have those in place and make sure that they're paying you some sort of a deposit. And do you take a deposit? You said?
No, I do not. I charge pet rent. I
Pet-
will say, a couple of things that are very important. Number one, you need to know your laws, your liability laws for your state regarding pets. Florida, for example, is much tougher than Colorado. And you can go to places like dogbitelaw.com and look those things up. But, and my history tells me the pets that have been the toughest for me to deal with really are cats, especially male cats. I always want the cats neutered and spayed because they will mark their territory if you're not careful, and then you got to pull out the carpet, pull out the pad, seal the floor, and start over. Really larger dogs, Labrador retrievers or whatever, they scare people. They're large, but if there was ever a burglar or someone, they'd hold the flashlight for them. The burglar just doesn't realize that. The little dogs, the yappy little dogs, in most cases, I think they scratch doors and cause more problems than some of the big ones.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I actually, and I can speak from personal experience about the cat thing, in terms of them marking their territory. I bought a house, or actually a condo, from somebody, and there was so much. We used a damp meter in order to determine how much water was actually being retained in the shag carpet in the place that we were going to buy, and it went off the charts because this lady had cats, and she didn't clean as much as or as often, and it was just, yeah, it was not a pretty sight. So why do landlords accept the first applicant who meets a minimum threshold requirement?
We really covered that already, I think.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know, it's can you hire the best qualified, and you can. One last thing on pets, just so that it's covered. You can also use a black light to see the urine, and that's not a bad idea if you're buying a property, to take a black light with you, and just
yep.
remember back to the 70s when all of us had black lights, and bring yours out of storage and take a look. You'll see all the urine.
Good point. All right. So, why do landlords clean rentals and do improvements between tenants? We didn't cover that.
No, we didn't cover that one. I mean, when would you do that? I mean, most people do it when they have downtime. That's not when we do it, however, or at least typically it's not when we do it. We will find a tenant who is tried and tested, and we'll go to that tenant and say, if Santa Claus came tomorrow, is there anything you'd like done to this house? And we'll plant the seed, and oftentimes they'll let us know that there are things they'd like done. And we have gone through entire houses while they're occupied, and really, I mean, I can think of one. Well, I can think of several right off the top of my head, but one, we asked them and they wanted new windows, so we put windows in the house. It was time, it needed it, and we rebuilt the deck. And then we said, well, yeah, but the rooms are kind of small. Wouldn't you like to have a great big open kitchen? And so we knocked down the wall from the living room to the kitchen, took off the popcorn ceiling, put in can lighting, put an island in, and changed out all the cabinets. And the tenant didn't have any kitchen for 6 weeks, but they thanked us very much, and we didn't lose a day of rent. And we kept going through the whole house, and we rebuilt the entire house. Most landlords don't understand that what depreciation is all about. Depreciation really is both because you have physical wear out, and you also have functional obsolescence as times change. And so you either need to exchange your properties for newer properties periodically, or if you think you have a good mousetrap, you have a good house, good location, mature landscaping, et cetera, then you need to rehab the properties. If you rehab them when it's vacant, you can have equipment stolen, you've got costs of doing it, you've got downtime, all kinds of problems. If you do it while they're occupied, well, people are protecting your equipment, they're protecting your materials, they thank you for it. When you're done, it's one justification for a rent increase, and if they move, it's ready to go. We want to go from a tenant to a tenant with no downtime, and we do that typically all the time.
Okay. That's amazing. I mean, so you're doing, that's that's very counter to what people are doing right now.
Very counter.
In terms of doing it while they're there and coming to them and proactively asking them what they would like to have done. And I think it does set you up for potentially getting a rent increase or justification for it, which is genius. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, it really it pays off in so many ways. I mean, our existing tenants will show the properties to the next tenants who are moving in, and we really do go from one to the next. In fact, we're signing a lease later today with a new tenant for a property that the existing tenant is moving out at the end of the day. If you think about it, when do people move out of houses? They typically move out on the last day of the month. Well, when do people move into houses? Typically, they move into houses on the first day of the month.
Right.
So if you have any make-ready time, you're really good at what you do, and you can turn a house around in 2 or 3 days. How much time have you lost? You haven't lost 2 or 3 days. You've lost a month because people who needed it on the first found someplace else. And I dare say that the average nationwide is most people, let's say, maybe keep people for 2 years. Well, if every 2 years you lose a month income, that's 4% vacancy, 4+% vacancy over 2 years. You can't afford that. 1 month's rent, you will never pick up the rent that you lost. So you need to have someone there. I'll throw out one other thing. I have a good friend in Jackson, Mississippi, and I went to see him one time, and he bought a house on a Friday afternoon, and on Sunday he took me by to see the house. Well, between Friday and Sunday, someone had stolen the air conditioning compressor just in those 2 days because it wasn't occupied. Owners can't afford to have vacant houses these days. Your insurance won't cover you for vandalism after 30 days. You need people protecting your assets. Oh, and that brings up one other point. Most people think that houses are real estate. Real estate is an asset. They may say, well, your personal residence is not an asset because it eats you, it doesn't feed you. But they'll say all other real estate really are assets. I disagree. I don't think they're assets at all. Empty real estate eats you. It does not feed you. It costs a lot. The biggest asset landlords have, and they miss this all the time, is their tenants. Their tenants are their assets. Their tenants are their employees. And if they just change their attitudes on how they dealt with tenants, many times landlords think tenants are liars. They never look better than the day they first moved in. It goes downhill from then. And I'll ask a room full of landlords, I'll say, well, how many of you were tenants at some point in your life? And let's face it, we all were tenants. And then I'll say, okay, how many of you were bad tenants? And every once in a while, someone will raise their hand and say, they'll say they were. But by and large, no one's a bad tenant. So why do landlords have this bad attitude about tenants? It's all attitude. If you expect the worst, you get the worst. If you expect the best, you get the best, as long as you screen for it, as long as you have procedures. And trust me, we do.
Good. That's awesome. And wow. I mean, there's a couple of things that came up for me. Number one, just the fact that you can show the property and not have to be there and have your tenant do it is a big reason why you're obviously able to run your business yourself and run it remotely if you need to, because you've got that employee there showing your property for you and not incurring and avoiding that downtime and making that property so that it's rented and it's rented immediately after that person leaves. So they're who better to talk about your property than somebody that's happy with who you are as a landlord and with the property itself. They're your best advocate. It's like what we use in our industry is called social proof. That's the best social proof you can get. It's somebody that's actually been in there. They'll be able to explain that better than you because they've lived there for the past 2, 3, 6, 10 years, and they answer all the questions that the person has from personal experience. I mean, it doesn't get any better than that.
Right, absolutely right. Now, you think about, I'll throw out one other thing that is a benefit also, and that is in the sales arena, people will, I'm trying to think of what the right word is, but they'll bring some furniture in to showcase a house. What is stage a house? Yeah. And landlords typically do not stage a house. When you look at the pictures online, they're pictures of vacant rooms, and they don't look that great. Well, if a house is occupied by a tenant who really is a good steward of the asset, and you've screened for the right guy, he has decent furniture. So the house looks a heck of a lot better with his furniture in it than with it being vacant. And I'll tell you, you don't want to be there as a landlord when someone's going through your house. If you are, a lot of negotiation will take place of, would you do this? And you've got so much time in it after 2 or 3 people that if someone's got a pulse and 5 cents in their pocket, you might be inclined to accept them. You want to change the psychology so that the applicants are selling you as to why you should give them the keys to the castle. Very different. They go out and look and they say, how do the colors work? Where does our furniture fit? It either works or it doesn't. And once they know, then they sell you as to why you should do business with them. And you have no time in it, so you can cut it off surgically if at any point in time you don't like them.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, we got a few more questions here, so that we keep conscious of the time that we have. Why are landlords afraid to raise rents?
I think they're afraid their tenant's going to move. And from my standpoint, you need to raise rents every year, and you need to tell tenants when they move in right up front that there will be regular rent increases. If there's not regular rent increases, you're going to have to sell the house, or it's going to be foreclosed or something, because costs keep going up. You've got to share those expectations so they know up front. If you have a really good tenant and they're there for a year and you raise their rent and they say, well, and they did not expect it, they say, who do you think you are? I was a great tenant. So then they shoot themselves in the foot, move out of your property, move into another property where the landlord just raised the rent and they didn't know it.
Yeah.
Our objective is to raise rents every year no matter what the market's doing. You've got houses that aren't next to each other. Most of them are around owner-occupants. And if the tenants are happy with you and happy with the product you're giving them, happy with the service, then even if it's only $5, you should, I think, raise rents a little bit every year. If you stop, it's really hard to get started again. And if you just do a little bit, it's not bad at all.
Interesting. So the concept is it's like a psychological thing. People expect it when they see it, and it's a regular thing. As opposed to if you stop, then you got to start all over again. It's like you either have momentum or you don't. And as you know, one of the guys I listen to a lot is John Maxwell, and he says it's all about the big mo. If you have momentum, and it applies to raising rents too. I mean, it's almost like a pattern interrupt. If all of a sudden,
Well, we actually sell them a rent lock that guarantees that their rent won't go up more than 10%. And so then when they get a rent increase which is less than 10%, generally they're very pleased.
That's awesome.
You want to underpromise and overperform.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you set the expectation, and then when if it's less than that, then they're happy. So it's great.
And once people have been there a couple of years, there's no reason to move unless they're going to buy a house, unless they have more kids and need more space, or if there's only one bathroom and they're having to fight with their kids to get ready for work, they need another bathroom off the master bedroom, or they're moving out of the community. Other than that, if they're happy with you and happy with the product, they'll stay for a long time.
Interesting. Well, and so why do landlords evict, David?
Well, landlords evict because they've hired the wrong guy. I mean, what can I tell you? Was that a specific question that I had on there?
Yeah.
Okay, then the answer to the question is really that they evict. Do they evict for non-payment? And I say no. They evict because they hired the wrong guy to put in the house. It's their fault. If you ever have an eviction, the first thing you need to do is have an autopsy of what went wrong, and you've got to change your systems and procedures so you don't do it again. That's really the bottom line. And rather than evict, it's much better to have the tenant decide that they don't want to do business with you anymore, and they move on their own accord. And
Gotcha.
that's fairly easy to set up.
Gotcha. That's interesting. So look at what you've done or haven't done, and then really break the whole scenario down so that you can learn from it and make the next interaction with a tenant a better one.
That's exactly right. And if you look at business situations, if you ask people, would you rather fire an employee or have them quit? You'd rather have them quit. Number one, no unemployment insurance. Number two, they won't screw up your passwords on your computer as they walk out, or they won't steal from the till. Same thing with a tenant. If you evict, it takes time. They're there for 30 days and they can be getting steamed. Yep. If they fire you, meaning they decide to move, it's surgical, it's quick, and they're out.
Gotcha. So why do landlords rekey between tenants? That's one of your questions here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a liability issue. They want to be real careful that, they don't have a lawsuit. The issue really there with the rekeying is there was a lawsuit, I think, in the state of Wyoming a number of years ago, and a landlord advertised that his properties were secure or rekeyed or whatever. People moved in, and then someone was either raped or there was a theft or something went wrong, and the court then looks at what percentage of liability do different parties have for whatever took place? And the landlord was found to have some liability because he advertised it as being secure in some matter. So we don't do that. We actually have a paragraph that says something to the effect that we want you to feel safe in this house. And we want you to know that if you want to rekey the property, you can go at it and rekey the property. And here's the guy we recommend, and you certainly can have a deadbolt on every exterior door in the house. When you move, we want one key to work every lock in the property. And in fact, I tell them that if they don't want to give us a key while they're living there, that's fine. But I let them know I actually am a certified locksmith and they can't keep me out of the house anyway, and it may be in their best interest to give us a key. But by them signing off that they know that they have the right to rekey and we've recommended that they rekey, we think we have less liability than us telling them that we've rekeyed the property.
Wow.
Does that make sense? Do you see that?
Yeah, it does. Wow. That's interesting. I mean, so in the fact that you can go in there and rekey the property yourself it gives you a lot of leverage too. So that's really neat.
Well, our old system used to be that I'd stamp all our keys do not duplicate. I'd stamp our corporate logo on them. I'd give them as many as they wanted. I'd write down on their contract how many they had. If I got the same ones back when they left, I felt it was reasonably secure. Nowadays, we don't give out any keys to vendors or tenants in seeing vacant properties. We have keypads on all garage doors with the garage door openers, and we can give them a code that will open the garage door and they can get in the house. Then when a tenant moves in, they can change that code in 30 seconds or 60 seconds, and the whole house is pretty secure. The only case where we can't do that is if we have a detached garage that doesn't go through the house.
Interesting. So okay, so you're leveraging that garage door opener to allow people in. That way you're not having to rekey.
Well, and the other thing we've done is we have to give out a lot less keys because there's a lot of latch kids that come home from school and need to get in. Yep. And if you give them a key, they lose the key, then the house is not secure. If they don't need a key, they can just push the buttons on the key code for the garage door. They don't need a key. It works out really well.
That's genius. So why do landlords do property inspections?
Again, it's to cover themselves in most cases, and most of them I'm talking property managers, or they want to make sure that the tenants aren't destroying the property. We really screen very, very carefully before we let an applicant in. Okay. But psychologically, I really feel strongly that if you're checking out the house on a regular basis, essentially doing bed checks on tenants, they're not going to feel like it's their place. They're going to feel like it's your place, and they're not going to stay long term. Our vendors are certainly our eyes and ears if something's done on the property. Neighbors, we contact a neighbor when we take on a new house and say, we're very concerned if anything so much as smells bad next door. Here's my card. Pick up the phone and call me. And by the way, do you mind if I write down your name and number so if I ever think something's funny, you can look across your back fence? We also tend to deliver Christmas gifts, which really gives us an unannounced access inside the house because they don't know we're coming. But we really do give those because we really enjoy thanking these people for doing a great job for us during that year.
Wow.
It works well.
That's a nice. That really sets you apart from everybody else. And like you said, I mean, it gives you another strategy that you can implement in order to get access to the property, and it's obvious that
we're constantly trying to break down the landlord-tenant mindset and let people know we're on the same team. We want the same things. If we work together, we can accomplish a heck of a lot more.
Okay. We've got 5 more. So why do landlords schedule property showings or hold open houses?
they don't know how else to show the properties. I pretty much covered this before, and that our tenants will show our properties to new applicants. They're motivated to do that, and so we're not there. If for some reason we took on a new house and it was vacant, well, then we used to have them come pick up a key and give us a deposit. Now we will set up a meeting, but if we're not available, we'll ask them if they have a smartphone. And these days, most everyone has a smartphone. We'll get them to send us a copy of their driver's license through their smartphone, and we'll give them the keys to we'll give them the keypad number for the garage door opener, and get them to call us as soon as they've closed up the house after they've been through it, and give us some feedback. So again, it's not good for landlords to be there when the properties are being seen, in my opinion.
Yeah, see, you are pretty high tech. You keep telling me that you're pretty low tech, but I'm impressed. That's a great use of a smartphone, just to have somebody snap a picture of their driver's license and text it to you or email it to you. I mean, that's great. I mean, I think that's pretty high tech. So
I don't remember saying that I was low tech.
Oh well,
I mean, we're always trying to grow. That's the other reason I'd go to NARPM to pick up new stuff.
Maybe it was Jack that we were referencing in
maybe.
Yeah. So why do landlords have security deposits? And that was another question that you had.
Because everyone else always has. Security deposits are always a problem. If you're a fee manager working for someone else, the owner always thinks you're giving away the ship, and the tenants always think you're stealing from them. Many times, landlords think security deposits are really their money, and they just got to put it into words as to why they retain it when a tenant moves out. Mm-hmm. I don't think a security deposit ever bought a tenant anything. Money is an economic qualifier. More money in the deal is better than less money in the deal.
Right.
But you're always using either the carrot or the stick in this business, and I'm here to tell you that the carrot works infinitely better than the stick. We pay a performance bonus based on how tenants have performed when they move out of our properties, and the performance bonus can be any amount of money. It can be an amount greater than the first month's rent, equal to the first month's rent, less than the first month's rent, or nothing based on how they perform. And I've got to say that when people don't know what they're getting back, if they're getting, not getting back, but getting, or if they're going to get a performance bonus, we get the cleanest houses, in my opinion. We get people who really move mountains and cast them into the sea in terms of finding the right next applicants for us. And we get a tremendous amount of cooperation. And let me just tell you, if we don't lose a month's downtime and going from a tenant to a tenant, I am so delighted to write a check to these folks that have done a good job for us. But security deposits, they just take you to court. I don't want to go to court. I see no benefit in it. We just don't have them.
Yeah, you're so right on. And again, it's totally really the antithesis of what we're used to learning or what I've was exposed to in the beginning, which is exactly what I started this entire presentation on, which is that you're not your standard property manager. You're not you're as you said, you're kind of a square peg trying to fit into a round hole in the way that you manage your properties, with whether it's through the master lease or all these concepts that you're talking about. I mean, giving somebody a reward or a bonus if they give you the property back in as good or better condition is such a drastic difference from what other people do, which is you've got a deposit and there's this thinking that I'm not going to get it back, and then there's this conflict that's created out of that.
True.
And when you take that conflict away, it changes not only our attitude, but the other thing is that it changes the person that's in the property's attitude. And why not give a bonus? Because think about it, if you really figure out how much time you'd be spending in going and showing the property, which is what you'd have to do if you didn't set it up this way, because there would be that conflict relationship as opposed to an employee-employer relationship, which is more of a helping each other out type relationship.
Right, cooperative mode.
A cooperative relationship. They're on your team they're showing, if you add up all the hours that it takes to show the property, all the time lost that you'd have in terms of not only time lost but also rent income that you'd lose because the property goes vacant because you're not going from one tenant to another tenant with no downtime. I mean, just it all makes sense to me. I know this because I've been a property manager. I've been in situations where I've been a property owner, and I've had situations where I've had ACs stolen from my property because the property was not lived in. There's nobody there. It was vacant. I had 2 of them stolen, actually. So I know. I've felt the pain. I've felt the problems, and so I hear you loud and clear. So this is
you
really,
probably had to deal with some cleanup too.
yeah, clean up, and then how am I going to rent the property unless that's done? And then I have to deal with the AC guy, and then there's that time that's involved too. I mean, It just goes on and on and on. It's just
drag.
It's a rabbit hole that you get into, and it's like there's no end to it. So there's so many advantages. This is coming from somebody that speaks from experience. So why do landlords dislike pre-1978 houses, David?
Well, it's the whole lead deal. Houses that are pre-78 are deemed to have lead unless you can prove they do not have lead. And the renovator rules that went into play a couple of years ago in April make it prohibitive to deal with these houses unless you know they don't have lead.
Okay.
We got a certified lead inspector from a certified lead inspection firm that had an XRF machine and an X-ray fluorescent spectrometer, and we sent them through our properties before the law went into effect to determine where there was lead. And I can tell you right now that in many cases there is not much lead. And I was scared to death that we'd find a whole bunch of lead, but if you do find lead, you know where there's not lead. And if you're ever doing repairs or anything where there's not lead, it's a non-issue. You don't have any compliance issues. But we now know whole subdivisions that were pre-1970 subdivisions that have no lead. There was no lead paint used really after 1950. We went back to, well, on my own properties, I went back to 1949 and found no lead. We found lead in one place on one of my properties. It happened to be on the post for a mailbox, and it was because we bought a new expensive lockable mailbox, and if someone came by and hit it with a baseball bat, I wanted them to vibrate and not the mailbox. And so we took an old pipe and made a stand for it, and it had lead paint on it. But lead paint was more expensive than not lead paint, so you tended to find it more on the upper end white-collar houses. We did find it in one house built in 1951, a high-end house, and we did find it in some places in a bungalow built in the 20s. But what we found is you can make lemonade from these lemons, because now we can go into these subdivisions, and because the pre-78 rule has stigmatized houses, we can negotiate lower prices if we're acquiring them. And as soon as we've acquired them, we can have the nice man go through with his XRF machine, give us a 30-page report that shows there's no lead, and we destigmatize them. So I think that most of the problems with lead for my own self have gone away. They're not a big deal.
Wow, well, that's great insight into an issue that a lot of people are very reluctant to even go into. I mean, there's a lot of people. There's a big. I know I had a big fear of that. I was buying properties that were in that pre-1978 era, and there's just such a stigma around it. And like you said, I mean, only somebody that has been through it, has dealt with it, could speak from your standpoint. That's really good insight. So I appreciate it, and I didn't know that.
And the key thing I tell you is, if you do any work under the renovator rules, it's very expensive because you check each thing in the house, and someone's going to nickel and dime you. Whereas if you really check it out ahead of time and find the right guy, we were able to find someone for about $350 a pop for each house to go through. It didn't matter if they were 3,000 square feet or 1,600 square feet. That was a great deal.
Yes, that's wow. I mean, so you get the property at a discount, and it's all because of the stigma. So you're really leveraging the stigma to to go in and get the property for a discount, and you're also destigmatizing the property by having the expert go in and produce the report so that nobody's fearful about it as in terms of a renter or in your future dealings.
Right.
That's awesome. We got two more. Why does the government allow landlords to depreciate our investment property?
I really already covered that. I mean, I think that houses have wear out that needs to be dealt with, and you know, I see it over and over again. I see people that bought houses 30 years ago, and the houses perform great, and all of a sudden they're not performing great, and they wonder why. Well, they're competing with chrome and glass and vaulted ceilings, new floor plan houses, and they wonder what the heck's wrong. They need to change the floor plans. They need to fix them up. They offer a lot where they are, because in many cases they're in older neighborhoods with mature landscaping, and one of the nice things about a lot of older neighborhoods is you have multi-generations living together, which I think is a major benefit. If you have a brand new neighborhood, they tend to be all young folks, and a lot of those neighborhoods are what I would call neutron bomb financed. You know, they're all over leveraged. The loans blew up, killed off the borrowers, and left the houses intact. And you got all these young folks also that don't have an extra nickel to rub together, so the yards aren't in, the fences aren't up, etc. In the older neighborhoods, with some older folks in there, the old folks shame the young folks into taking care of the darn place. And so I like some of those houses, but you got to take care of functional obsolescence, and you got to take care of wear out, and that's the purpose of depreciation as far as I'm concerned.
Wow. It's great insight. One more. Why do landlords burn out after 20 or 25 years, David?
Yeah, I think we kind of covered that one too. It's just that they don't do things the way we do them, and the relationship between landlord and tenant is one that's constant knocking heads. And it doesn't have to be that way. If it's not a cooperative mode, it's a competitive mode. The tenant wants more, and the landlord wants more, and they both, it's not working. And so, I mean, one of the things I like about this, what business do you know that you get to pick the people you do business with? That's pretty neat. I get to pick the folks I do business with. And in this business, no one can tell me that I've got to quit at age 65. I can do this at age 90 if I'm still alive and kicking and choose to. I like the relationships. I like the people in my houses. I'm having a lot of fun.
That's amazing. I mean, that's a very different report than I get from a lot of people that are doing property management. A lot of people that I talk to cannot stand the day-to-day evictions, the fixing, the late-night calls from the tenants, et cetera, et cetera. So anybody that's watching this, go and visit David at, you said it's davidtilney.com, T-A-V-I-D, on his website. There's information there that you can get right away in terms of what he does. Obviously, we've talked a lot about over the past hour and now probably 10 minutes about some of the shifts that you'll encounter when you start learning these concepts from David, and when you're a property manager or a property owner, and when you apply them, like David said, I mean, this whole process of finding somebody becomes different. That finding somebody that's going to ultimately be a quote-unquote employee of yours, which is totally different than the usual relationship. But ultimately, what it does is it'll change your thinking about how that relationship goes with that person that's actually in the property that you are the principal of. And that's what's so fascinating with the way that David does this, and it's just through time and learning that David has learned these concepts. So I think if you do own property, it would make sense for you to learn more about it, about his concepts and principles, and how to apply them to the properties that you own or that you're a principal of. So David, I want to thank you for coming on today and spending some time with me on this hangout. And I think it was pretty painless, right?
It was. I was intimidated, but no, it was fine. I enjoyed it.
now we just got to get you to do this with other people and interact. I think that's the next step. You think you'll ever do that?
Yeah, I'm not opposed. I think I need to learn a little bit more about it. I'd like to see you do another one, but yeah, no, I think it's very feasible.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks, David, and
Thank you, Ryan.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.